Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was February 5th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico. And this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt Cara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is one that I think is a special leveling up of the discourse around Joan's illness. The sender is Violant. Violant is writing to a bunch of monasteries. And from what I can tell, the selection of monasteries here is pretty important. There's at least a few of them in the list that are Carthusian monasteries, which are known for being more like hermit-style monasteries, I think. And so we have this letter going out from the Queen on February 5th, so it's a month since Père the Ceremonious died and Joan and Violant became king and queen. Violant is thanking the monasteries for their prayers, and she's noting that those prayers probably had a beneficial effect on Joan because he is now in better health after, and we have the word, malalties, sickness. I think that Joan's illness in all the other documents we've looked at so far has been referred to obliquely, not using the word sickness, malalties, but using the word misfortune, accident, which does appear in this letter too, or difficulties, the arduis, the difficulties encountered. And so for the first time, I think, on the podcast, we are encountering the word for sickness in medieval Catalan, malalties. I was talking to somebody who has been listening to the podcast quite a bit, and this particular listener wanted to have me read out one of the letters to kind of get a sense of the rhythm of it, the voice of it. And I do realize that not everybody has enough time to go to the web page for each and every document each and every day. And so I did want to grant that request. I feel like Joan and Violant granting requests in these documents, but I'm definitely of a different status level than the two of them. So yeah, I wanted to go ahead and read out one of the letters, and I think this is a really good one. And you'll notice what's good about it is that there's a lot of cognates to English. And you'll be able to hear that, and then you'll be able to hear just a little bit of the official chancery style that a lot of the letters conform to. So when you listen to this one, you're getting a good sample of the kind of official correspondence tone that also involves a bit of a personal touch because Violant is talking about her husband's weakened body. So you can't exactly keep it all businesslike when that's the topic. All right, I'm going to begin the reading. It's going to go for a couple minutes here. And if you're kind of just wanting to hear me discuss the document and not listen to it, then you can just do a little fast forward, and I'll pick up after the medieval Catalan reading here and discuss a little bit more about what is in today's document. La Reina. Be creem sapiats lo accident que el Signore e marit nostra ha sostengut e sostret. Benet ne sia Deu qui permet que tanta via durat. E com en les adversitats sia tengut tot Christia recorrer a nostra Signor Deu, lo qual es donador de tots bens, sanador de totes malalties, e reparador de tots mals. Pregam vos tan affectuosament, com podem que tots dies, en misses e altres honors canoniques, vulats fer oraciones en la iglesia de vostre monastier, com plus devotament per se porra, pregant e supplicant Nostra Señor Deu e la sua benita Maria, que vula restituir sanitat al dit Signore. E iatia que siats tenguts pregar per lo dit Signor, así com a Signor vostre natural, nos per les dites pregaries e intercessions nos tendrem per obligats a procurar vos gracies e favors, no en paga de les oracions, deure fer ordinarets en universal e en particular per tots los frares del dit monaster, clergues e laics. Data en Barcelona, sots nostra segel secret, accostament a 5 dies de febrer del année, and then there's the Roman numerals for the year 1387, and then the probata at the end. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of what it sounds like in Catalan, and I'm sure there's all kinds of pronunciation errors that I made because I'm not a native Catalan speaker. And then in addition, medieval Catalan would have been pronounced with some differences. So I apologize to anyone who knows a lot about how to pronounce Catalan and medieval Catalan, because I probably did a pretty terrible job in comparison to someone who's done this for a while. But that was my best shot. And we're all about just giving it your best here on the Historian's Notebook, where we're just focusing on that beginner's mind and trying to just kind of give it our best go. And all in the interests of learning, and all in very, very deep respect for those who have been working on these materials for years and years, and sometimes multiple decades, and all of the knowledge that they have built up and that I draw on in order to make some guesses and inferences about the meaning of what I'm looking at here. Okay, let's talk about some more of the content of this letter. And there's the word accident in the first line, which is misfortune. And then there's the word intercessions, intercessions. And these two words, they signal something in the context that is super important for understanding what's happening when Violant is thanking these monks for their prayers and also saying, hey, keep it up, please. What's going on is that there's a very deep belief in the interconnectedness between the divine and what happens to people in their daily lives. Joan's illness is not interpreted according to the way that we would normally in our time think about sickness. In our time, we still have a pretty common practice of trying to invoke higher powers beyond the scientific in order to give a little boost toward the recovery from some kind of illness. People will pray for their loved ones to get better. If you yourself are feeling ill, you're gonna take medicine probably, but you're also going to just have a little bit of a hope that, and you might not necessarily invoke some kind of deity, but you'll have some kind of supernatural level of hope. Maybe you'll call it luck. Maybe you'll say, oh, I just kind of had a willpower element here that pushed me through that illness. It's pretty common for people when they're sick, even in our society, to not be purely scientific in the way that they interact with the experience of illness. So you can definitely understand a little bit about what I'm going to say here. And I myself am limited in my understanding of what I'm about to try to characterize. Imagine a society where it's not just like this added bonus to have prayers when someone is sick, but it's actually channeling into something that's very real. Here's an interesting fun fact about medical education in the Middle Ages. If you were training to be a physician, someone who would do surgeries, say, in order to repair an injury on a body, you were actually given more hours of training in astrology than you were in anatomy. This is because there was a very deep-seated belief that the position of the stars had an actual physical effect on the goings-on on Earth. So you wouldn't want to do a surgery on a day that the stars were not aligned toward the maximum benefit of the movement of all of the physical material of a body and the earth and the, I guess you could say, spiritual waves that would connect between the everyday physical world and the divine. So when we're looking at what Violant is saying to these monks in relation to Joan's illness, we're encountering people who saw a much more direct connection between the divine and bodily conditions. And it's not to say that it was a regular occurrence for them to cure something by prayer. It's not like every single day they witnessed in a kind of cause effect fashion the connection between the divine and the bodily conditions of someone in improving or not. But they did not have any doubt that there was a role for the divine to play, and that the more influence you would try to build up in the divine, there would be a real effect. And what would block it is the question that would come up in their minds. Not whether it was efficacious or not. It would obviously have an effect. All these prayers would work to make Joan healthy. But the question is there something else that is at work in the opposite direction? Is there a curse? And this is something that is very real for Violant, for Joan, for everyday people. This, I think, is an instance where, by looking at what the elite are writing about, because we have way more records surviving from the elite, we can actually extrapolate out and make some reasonable inferences about everyday people. And I think it's very legitimate here and is justified by a lot of the evidence, not just in these documents, but evidence that's been collected widely about life in the Middle Ages, to say that this is a window into how pretty much everybody, and I would say that in Christian communities and amongst Christians, this was a very real thing, maybe even more so than in the Jewish and Muslim communities. But even in the Jewish and Muslim communities, there was still a belief in the connection between the divine and the everyday occurrences. With Christian communities, though, there's this added bonus. And that's where the word intercession comes in. The intercession that Violant mentions here, it's not just saying, oh, you helped, you interceded in this. It's actually referring to a very large practice of connecting to the divine in all sorts of methods. And one method that was extremely popular in the Middle Ages, and actually continues to be very popular even to this day, is relics. So if you have a piece of a saint's body, then you can have a channel of intercession where you can connect spiritually with that physical remnant, and it will then be a kind of added channel to get you access to the divine. So people, especially Christians of the Middle Ages, were looking for these intercession avenues, and the prayers of the monks are another such intercessionary action. So I've kind of thrown out a lot at you in this, with a lot of context about the way that medieval people interacted with the divine and blended it in to the everyday. There's a more practical question that I just want to touch on before the end of today's episode, which is about Joan's health and trying to track what was going on. This letter makes it seem like Joan has mostly recovered. There's another letter to a lot of these monasteries. I'm not sure if the list is actually the same list or if there's a little bit of a difference, but Dawn Bratch Prince, in an article from 1994, found an article and transcribed it, not an article, a letter, and transcribed it, in which Violant is writing to monasteries again, a lot of the same monasteries as the ones in today's letter, and saying, thanks for keeping up the prayers. Joan has been ill for a long time. And that's on April 29th. So, is there one long continuous illness here? That's a possibility. And we're going to try to keep tracking this, because remember, it's around the end of April that Violant reveals even more information about the extent of Joan's illness. And it's also in April that Violant reveals that she has sought out a book of curses. Not to place a curse on anybody, but to try to find out if there is a counter spell in order to negate the effects of the curse that she believes Joan has been subjected to by some evildoer, some adversary. So that's what's coming up in April, and maybe we'll see hints of it beforehand. But I think we've gotten to the end of today's episode. There's, I know, a whole lot more that we could talk about. We could talk about some of these monasteries. I'll put some links to information about them in the webpage for today's episode. Thanks for listening to this installment of the Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Compagnona. And if you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job, because our motto here at the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website jonathanseyfried.net to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.